For those colleagues who are interested in climate change, you can remain in this room. For colleagues who are interested in health research, which is being led by Institute on Inequalities in Global Health, University of Southern California, the venue is in room 3. Okay. I think I'll wait again and mention that this is why I was trying to avoid the tea break, because you keep announcing. You don't tire because people are still coming in. And the announcement is that this is now a parallel session. What we had in the morning were plenary sessions, and the plenary sessions were necessitated by the delays and the challenges with audio, with digital technologies, with streaming, with online presence. So now we are going into the parallel sessions. So for example, Peter Mbuva, you might be more interested in health than climate. If you are interested in health, your room is out there, room number 3. If you are interested in climate change, you remain here. Right. Okay. All right. Colleagues interested in health, I want to re-emphasize the point. Our room for discussion is room number 3, right out there in the corridor on your left, on your right. And for those like Professor Niza who have been here, you might be like, I'm sounding like a stuck record, but I have to keep repeating that those who are interested in climate change can remain here. Those who want to focus, whose interest lies in health research, the parallel session is running in room number 3. Thank you. I think I'll stop here and hand over to our colleague, Dr. John Mahasi, for this session. And I think we'll keep repeating that the climate change, the health research session is in the parallel session in room number 3, right outside in the corridor on your right. But over to you, Dr. Mahasi. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to go into the African Agency for Climate Change, Energy Transition and Critical Minerals parallel session. And before I allow the panelists to introduce themselves shortly, I would like to make 2 key opening remarks. The first remark is that growing up, I remember walking along rivers in the village as a young boy, and there used to be a small black water beetle that used to dart across the water very fast, and literally every small stream and river that I crossed back then would have one of those, or I would have several of those. Now, as I've grown up, I struggle to find any of those bugs darting across the water. In fact, I've had to take opportunity to walk with my kids so far just to show them that black beetle darting across the water. Number 2, whenever it came to around Christmas time, it was very certain that we are approaching the Christmas period, because there used to be certain monsoon winds that blew in a certain way all the way through mid-November to the end of December. And whenever those monsoon winds blew, we were sure that the Christmas season was around. Now, looking at the situation now, it's usually very wet and damp over Christmas, and I'm surprised that this is not how it was as we grew up. Lastly, around June, July, there used to be large flocks of migratory birds, very little tiny birds, I do not know the name of the birds, that would fly from across, and from the fairy tales of what we were told then, whether it's true or not. In fact, having watched National Geographic, I know they are not from Egypt, but that time we used to be told these birds are from Egypt. The truth is actually they were from Europe. They were migratory birds that migrated during the summer down south looking for. And all those things have kind of disappeared. So even as we talk about climate change, from a livelihood perspective, there is another angle to it that brings a lot of nostalgia with it that perhaps should raise a lot more concern than not in the way that we are managing our natural resources going forward to posterity. Now, the second thing is, who knows the country that is in the middle of the world, where the Greenwich Mean Time crosses the equator precisely in the middle of the world? What is that country called? Oh, no, not Kenya. It's further west. It's further west. No. The equator does not go through the UK, does it? Let me see. Which country is in the middle of the world? All right, homework. But it's off the coast of Guinea. What is the country called? Now, an island. I've given you the idea. Okay, food for thought. But what is the conversation that we are getting into? Driven by a couple of issues, including the proliferation of technology, including the IoT, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, the burgeoning youth population bringing in a demographic dividend, a growing mass of consumers and increasing expenditure power, the geopolitical influence is gonna shift down south and a little bit east as African countries prepare and brace themselves to play a more critical role in geopolitics, geocommerce, and the advancement of policy, theory, and practice in different areas. Therefore, as we have this session and are going into the African Agency on Climate Change, Energy Transition, and Critical Minerals, I just thought I should lay that background and allow my panelists 1 minute or less just to introduce yourselves, and then we will go down and have the questions. And as we do this introduction, I would like to welcome the panelists who are joining us virtually. We will give you a chance. So maybe if I mention your name, whether you are joining us virtually or physically, you take just a minute to introduce yourself as we proceed with the session. To start with, Dr. Paul Mukoki. Paul Mukoki.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good morning. Yes, my name is Paul Mukoki. I'm from University of Witwatersrand. Yeah, I'm going to share you on the Africa Agenda, climate and energy challenges. I don't know whether I can, I've sent someone my slide to share. Can someone share it for me? Because I can't share from this side.
All right, I see the IT person raising his hands up. How do we get in touch with Dr. Mukoki to share his presentation? You already have it? Okay, it is received. Somebody will share it when we get to you. Linda, Valerie, introduce yourself. There you go.
Hello everyone, my name is Valerie Buthelezi. I work at the African Center of the Study of the United States at the University of Witwatersrand. I'm also a PhD candidate at the same university in geography and environmental studies.
Pleasure to have you on the panel. Dr. Emily Oliphant.
Hi, can you hear me?
No, let's say the tech. All right.
My name is Emily Oliphant, and I'm based at the University of the Witwatersrand within the West Business School under African Energy Leadership Center. And I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the center, and my research is focused on green hydrogen, and my interest also boils down to water energy nexus. So I'm from a quite technical background, so I'm going to try and take off my science hat today.
All right, welcome to the panel. Dr. Manduna.
Hi everyone, my name is Kenneth Manduna. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh yes. Yeah. I am a postdoc at the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in Germany, but I'm based at Vita University. My research areas, they intersect energy transition, green minerals, mining, and also the resource nationalism aspect of it in Africa. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. Professor Lisa Otto, are you joining us online? Can you hear us?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you, Prof. Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Lisa Otter. I'm an associate professor at the University of Johannesburg and also acting director of the Charter Chair in African Diplomacy and Foreign Policy. My research interests are around diplomacy and foreign policy and their intersection with ocean and climate.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to have you on board. Mr. Michael Aswani.
My name is Michael Aswani. I'm a PhD student at the University of Nairobi, Department of Diplomacy and International Studies, and I'm also just a scholar who finished a study at the United States, the Institute for U.S. Institutes on U.S. Economics and Sustainable Development, 3-month course, which I finished recently from the city of Boston in Massachusetts. I'm also researching on issues of emerging technologies and resilience in urban ecosystems in African cities.
All right, Dr. Claude Kabemba. Can you hear us, Claude? All right, maybe...
The Southern Africa Resource Watch. Okay. This is the only outfit on the African continent that invests purely in the governance of natural resources. So I will be speaking around the issue of why Africa is the last frontier of critical minerals, yet Africa seems to be not benefiting from its own minerals that it should. Looking at the structural market trade policy, but also building in the African agency and why we should be working together to promote Africa interests.
Thank you so much, Dr. Claude. Now, as we think about the energy, mineral, resource, livelihood nexus, one of the things that comes out is resource-based conflicts, and we are about to get into one here. Those who had morning sessions were not good custodians of time, so now we are really squeezed for time. So we are going to try and minimize the conflict by trying to be a little bit more responsible with the time. When you are given your session, please, we will time you so that we are able to make and get the best value of time out of the short time we have and the wide range of issues that we need to explore. So when it comes to you, we have allocated 5-minute sessions. I would be really happy if you can use 3.5 or 4 minutes max for your session. And to be able to do this, since I cannot manage the time, my co-panelists are going to become co-timekeepers. So for Dr. Paul Mukoki, your timekeeper is Linda Valerie. You cannot go beyond 5 minutes. At the exact expiry of your 5 minutes is starting now, we will cut you off. Let us go. Thank you. Dr. Paul Mukoki, you have 4.5 minutes, if I'm not wrong. I think you'd rather speak through your presentation, Paul. If the technical team is having a challenge in projecting your presentation, you might as well make good use of your time by beginning just to run your talk. Oh, okay. All right, go ahead and make it quick. Paul, are you there? You are muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, yeah, sorry for that. Okay, yeah, I'm saying I'm going to talk about Africa's climate and energy challenges. Africa faces a unique challenges due to climate change and energy scarcity, impacting everything from livelihood to political stability. So through my presentation, I'll give you, I'll explore the climate energy context in Africa. I'll also go up to discussing the call for action.
Doc, we may have to skip your session if you don't get very organized. You have 3 minutes and you are muted again. I don't know how you are going to do this in 3 minutes, but it will be 3 minutes for real. Get on. Dr. Paul Mukoki, we cannot hear you. You're muted again. Is all well? Paul, we have skipped you, so please just hold on. If we get a minute at the end of this session, you'll be given a chance to make your presentation. For now, we move on to Linda. Linda, now I have 2 questions for you, which I want you to address within, if possible, less than 5 minutes. The first question is, what is the status of knowledge and information on climate change, energy transition, and critical minerals? How is it affecting development as well as geopolitical policy and practices? Focus on Africa. Number 2, who are the main players in these value chains and where are the African voices in this discourse? Again, focus on Africa. Thank you.
So regarding the first question that you asked about what is the current status of climate change knowledge production, I would say regarding the African context, I would actually say we are becoming leaders and innovators in the space of climate change knowledge production, because a lot of time the way that the curricula of environmental sciences or even other disciplines that are not necessarily geography or climate based, they tend to be overarching, and now it is included in multiple spaces and spheres. It's no longer a space where it's only confined to one space. For example, all the panelists here are from different disciplines or different backgrounds, and we have different vantage points from which we are now looking at the aspect of climate change. So this allows us to actually improve how we are producing knowledge from our own perspective rather than a perspective that is from outside looking in. So I would say the current state is, I wouldn't say it's perfect, I wouldn't say it's good, but I would say we are on our way there in this discipline in regard of climate change and understanding thereof.
2 questions, 2 follow-up questions. 1, if we are looking for this knowledge and information, where do we find it? And do you see it shaping policy and practice?
Regarding where we find it, I would say that is the space where we are lacking. A lot of times, as mentioned by multiple speakers today, it tends to be in the library. It tends to be loaded with technical jargon. It tends to be in a space where people who are not well versed in the field or well versed in concepts of sustainability, SDGs, they feel as though a lot of the content is foreign to them and they are not able to truly understand it. But also regarding how it frames policies, that it seems to be that the words that are in vogue, everyone wants to invoke the idea of sustainability.
We actually, we really can't follow what our panelists are saying, so it will be difficult for us to speak with a coherent approach. Is it possible to fix the sound?
Okay, our tech team has had the comment. Let's carry on. Try sort us out on that. Is it an issue of the mics? Is it an issue of... It's not the mics. It's from their side. No, but muting does not stop you from hearing. It stops you from talking. Unless I'm getting the technology wrong. I think you just check the systems, try troubleshoot the sound system, please. All right.
Yes, so going forward, I would say a lot of policy these days is focused towards the idea of sustainability. Everyone wants to use it as a keyword. It's popular, it's trendy. All the politicians are trying to make themselves sustainable, whether it's in economic ministries, education ministries, everyone is trying to incorporate more sustainable thinking. So I would say it's becoming something that is influencing how policy is made, but I wouldn't say it's influencing how policy is implemented.
All right. Finally, who are the main players in energy, critical minerals, climate change, globally and within Africa? And where are the African voices in this discourse?
So fortunately, with the previous panel that spoke about the Belt and Road Initiative, I'd off-ramp from that and say that a lot of the people in the value chains should be technically everybody, because we are all consumers of these critical minerals. We all use them in ways that even though we are not active consumers, we are passive in the sense that it is embedded in the technology that we use every day. We do not see ourselves as players in the value chain, so it becomes a situation where we think of it from a policy standpoint, we think of it from a governmental standpoint, but even we as daily, everyday consumers are members of the value chain. But I would say a lot of times it tends to be those people in charge of refinement rather than those who are in the space of extraction. So then that leaves African voices, who are mainly where the resources are extracted from, to simply be a primary source, but not a person who is considered in the value chain as being as important as the refiner or the consumer.
Any African voices that are audible in this space? You have 8 seconds.
I would say the African voices that are audible are all of them that are participating, such as Zimbabwe making rules like saying Chinese mines need to reapply. There are multiple countries where there's mining happening, where people are actually participating and rising up to say that they wish to be in the value chain and to be valued.
Thank you very much, Valerie. We move on to our next discussant, Emily Oliphant. One of these mics is... Yeah, yeah. Now, Dr. Emily. Yeah, most parts of Africa have sunlight for more than 8 or 9 months of the year, yet we have countries that experience 6 months of winter producing more solar energy and clean energy than these African countries that enjoy, some of them, 12 straight months of sunlight in a year. Where do you see the role of African governments in accelerating the transition towards clean energy?
I think the African government need to embrace renewable energy. And what I've seen is that we meet up in conferences and we ponder on solar and wind, but one special vector that you missed is green hydrogen. And I think we should collectively embrace all these clean energy solutions. And before talking about solutions, I think we also need to focus on the barriers as well. Solar, bioenergy, green hydrogen, all of them have barriers. But the key question is, what are we doing to overcome these barriers? And I don't think this is a question that we only need to ask the government, but we as key stakeholders, we also need to take part, collaborate, and find ways to overcome these barriers. I mean, we do have financial barriers, infrastructure limitations, and regulatory gaps, which are quite common. But when you look at green hydrogen, I'm going to reference South Africa. South Africa has announced 24 projects, of which half of them are now priority projects. However, South Africa is struggling with water requirements. Now, what can we do to overcome that? And I'm just gonna track back to saying, once we identify a problem, we also have to come up with a practical solution. So to give you a practical solution in terms of water requirements in South Africa, in terms of green hydrogen, South Africa is a coastal area. So we ask ourselves, since green hydrogen has a problem with water, what is something that we can do? we can use seawater, but then seawater has its own challenges because the process will incur additional costs in terms of demineralization or for producing the green hydrogen. So what the government can do as well is to look at the how to abate sectors and what can they do. So the government need to also look at how to abate sectors as well as using these clean solutions to increase the electrification of the continent, because although we do have fossil fuels, we are not saying that we need to leapfrog towards using clean energy solutions, but we can embrace energy mix as well.
All right, so allow me to cut you short a little bit and interject with another question. What do you think is the state of technical research in energy? Not academic research. I know in some places they can be synonymous, but we've seen a lot of focus on academic papers that talk about the state of energy, but how well are we doing in terms of technical research in the space of energy?
I think this also boils down to financial limitations. I don't think Africa is investing enough in research and development. And I like to give practical examples, and I always resort to green hydrogen because that is my area of expertise. I'm going to say that we need to invest more in research and development because that can assist us in terms of reducing the cost of these technology machineries and infrastructure. And we also need to look at where we can penetrate the value chain.
Key opportunities. Time is running out.
Okay, just to give you another an example, South Africa has an abundance of iridium and platinum. So when it comes to electrolyzer production, this is where we can penetrate the green hydrogen value chain by producing various components that require these minerals instead of shipping all these electrolyzers from China, while we do have the minerals that we can use to produce these electrolyzers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oliphant. We move on quickly. Dr. Manduna. A lot of conversation going on around the governance debate in the administration of both energy transition, minerals, as well as climate change management. What is your perspective? What do you see as key trends right now, key challenges and opportunities within these three spaces?
Thank you very much. I think I will go by challenges first. Like at the time, if we had to look at it, the prices of the critical minerals, the price of the critical minerals are going down. Compared to last year, if I can use lithium as an example, the price have fallen by 75%. You go to nickel and cobalt, between 45 to 70%, like pricing, like falling. So it's one huge disadvantage at the moment. And if I would also to talk about what I can call the debilitating dilemma, especially in the global south, the critical mineral sourcing countries. What is the dilemma at the moment? We are told we have to reduce our emissions, that is decarbonization, but at the same time, we also need to industrialize. So the issue is, where are we going to get enough energy when we are supposed to do two critical things at the same time? So in a way now, we are now being forced to say, reduce your emissions, but at the same time, provide enough electricity at an affordable rate. If we are to look in the continent, more than half of the population, they are still off the grid. So it's a huge challenge in itself. When it comes to the governance trends, if I can use Southern Africa as an example, where I can say there is a new scramble for critical minerals, you see the Chinese, the Arabs as well, also EU and in America, they are coming now to what? To try to scramble for those critical minerals. But at the same time now, Africans are also trying to come up with the nationalistic policies For example, you go to Zimbabwe, lithium companies are being forced to say, make sure you provide and establish a processing plant on site, to the point that like the 4 biggest lithium plants now, they also have what? Those like processing like plants. But now it is kind of like conflicting with what the world wants. Chinese and even like American, they want just to make sure they mine the mineral and get out. So in a way, it's a huge challenge because many African countries are saying, no, let us make sure we come up with a resource nationalistic policy so that we make sure our people, they benefit. And also, our communities, they also benefit from those minerals. But at the same time, what we call from the pit,
Okay.
the
All right.
pot.
All right. So you've mentioned something that is important there. We are talking about geopolitical research, and we'll come back that maybe with another discussant. What I want us to look now is the role of politics and political patronage in the governance of energy, resources, and critical minerals. Where do you see the current political weight lying, and where probably should it shift for things to become better?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very meritorious question, especially at the moment when many African economies, they are gravitating from being agro-based into extractive industry-based. And in a way, we have many countries with weak institutions. And because of that, for example, if you are to look at countries where there are many illegal miners or like many artisanal like miners, you would find a situation whereby, of course, they are illegal, but they are linked to powerful either politicians or bureaucrats or or business people. But in a way, you're asking yourself to say, why are you still calling them illegal? Why are you not like legalizing them or like what, like formalizing them in a way that they can be part of the system? But the issue is corruption is rampant in those sectors because they also want to benefit from whatever they are doing there. But now, if we are to look at the critical minerals now to say, how are we going to leapfrog or how are we going to address the problem of corruption or of political like patronage? It is a huge problem because critical minerals like on themselves, they are part of the cash cows at the moment like in the continent.
All right, I'm under pressure. Thank you very much for your contribution, Ken. Professor Lisa Otto, are you there? Professor Otto. Tech team, is our online audience there? Lisa Otto, Prof, how are you? I think Professor Lisa Otto has had a premonition that I had a very hard question for her. While we give an occasion for tech team to probably troubleshoot and look at what is available, whether we can have her as the next discussant, I want to come to you, Michael Aswani. What role do you see technology playing in amplifying? What role do you see technology playing in amplifying African voices in climate change, energy transition, and key minerals?
Thank you. Technology, and not just technology, but emerging green technology, is a critical enabler in enhancing how African agency can actually position itself in global geopolitics. Because through technology, and I'm just trying to see how technology has been able to change the landscape, the emerging technology, the landscape on climate change. Looking, for example, in Africa, and particularly in Kenya, Kenya has made very good strides in enabling green electricity. Most of our electricity that is generated in Kenya is over than 90% green electricity. But there are critical areas that Kenya also has to make enough efforts. For example, issues of e-mobility, issues of clean cooking, issues to do waste to energy, issues to do with efficient water management. These are areas, of course, we need to do a lot as a country, of course, that reflects all over the continent. Because we've been told about the continent having the potential of green energy, having the potential of solar, but we do not see the practical application and adoption of these technologies. Looking at countries that have been advanced, like Boston, for example, as a city in the US, they have been able to enhance data. And I think the way we use data in Africa, we haven't been able to integrate data into our solutions so that we have scientifically evidenced solutions to our problems. The way we use our Internet of Things and other emerging technologies in addressing the main challenges of climate impacts is also key. We have a disconnect also, which I also feel that we need to also embrace what we call public scholarship, whereby whatever is produced at the level of scholarship is not just retained at the ivory tower. We must also include the communities, because like Kenya, for example, recently had serious floods that swept almost the informal settlements of the country. What are our projections for next year, so that we do not sit again to see other people being swept next year? We need, therefore, to embrace technology so that we are not limiting the greenhouse gas emissions, but we are also making energy accessible and equitable to all. Thank you.
Very quickly, sorry for the pressure. It's not coming from me. I'm just the conduit of the pressure. What policy frameworks, platforms should be strengthened, revised, or considered to further amplify the African voices globally in this space, if I may add, even dismantled? Thank you.
Thank you. On issues of policy, starting from the African Agency, and I'm looking at the African Union and the way they have been able to frame these issues of climate change, energy transition, and critical minerals. It hasn't been given enough space to be able to maybe assume what I can call at the level of securitization. Critical minerals in Africa, for example, not only become a play for great power politics, but are also depriving Africa, what I can call, driving Africa to what I call the paradox of plenty, or the tragedy of the commons. We are seeing in terms of critical minerals, in terms of conflicts, in terms of people who have been deprived, and in terms of child labor. So we have not framed these issues of critical minerals to the extent that we can be able now to harness. And even those who are extracting these minerals, it's not just a matter of exporting them to their main capitals, but why can we have this processing here in Africa so that we enhance? And national policies are very critical, because states still will play a critical role in enhancing what we can call state-led policies, as we look at the regional and, of course, continental, within the framework, of course, of other international and multilateral summits, or what we can call multilateral policies.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Claude Kabemba, are you there? Claude Kabemba? Okay. I'll go back. Professor Lisa, are you there?
Hi, I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me.
All right. Yes, we passed by you earlier, by your place. Your door was locked, but it's good now that you're outside. We can see you and hear you. Now, very quickly, we have very limited time. I want to start with a statement which you may not necessarily agree with, but whichever way, look at the concept. They say diplomacy is the extended arm of the extension of the arm of commerce. That indeed, the avenue of diplomacy sometimes is used to front more business interest than not. Do you think African voices are audible in key diplomatic circles on climate change, energy, and key resources? If so, how? If not, where are the gaps and opportunities?
Well, this is the content of my entire paper, is where those voices are. But I'm afraid that with the limited time that's been given, I won't be adequately able to apprise you of that content, or to provide you the necessary background to understand the content. But the short answer is yes, African voices are audible in diplomatic circles on climate change, and some of them have been particularly audible, notably the Western Indian Island Ocean states, who have been key voices and advocates for issues of climate change, adaptation, mitigation, central in the loss and damage debates. And so they're really advancing a very strategic approach, I think, to their diplomacy in advancing these issues.
What areas do you think can be enhanced? Where do you think things can be done better for African voices to be more audible within these circles at a diplomatic level?
Well, I think a lot of African countries are not adequately concerned with climate change, because they have a lot more pressing developmental issues that they need to address before. Even though we're seeing increasingly, I mean, these massive floods that have been reported, for example, in Spain today, tell in South Africa, I think there has to be a greater cognizance that these issues are real, we can't escape them, and they're going to affect our development trajectories. And so therefore, it is important that we're having a stronger voice, a more collective voice, and that this voice isn't primarily coming from those countries that face disappearance as a result of sea level rise.
Lastly, access to funding flows. There are a lot of funds at a global level in terms of climate change adaptation and mitigation. Do you see Africa benefiting from these kitties, or do you think these amounts are placed beyond the reach of African countries?
Climate finance is not my area of expertise, so I can't comment on that.
Thank you very much. Dr. Claude Kabemba, are you available? All right. Paul Mukoki, are you available? All right. I think then with that, we call it a session. It has been an interesting conversation, but just maybe to get one or two, we'll give opportunity for one or two questions, but then trying to piece together two things that have come up from this conversation is that according to Dr. Manduna, Africa has a big basket of minerals whose value is declining, so one of these days they are going to find themselves with a big basket of stones that probably have very little value. How is it that this situation is going to impact a continent whose livelihood is based really on primary extractives, including within the agribusiness value chain? And then the other thing that is emerging is there is loopholes and opportunities for governance, governance enhancement, intensified research to be able to bring forth insights and products that probably will power the next frontier of energy solutions. Having said that, just two questions, and I know I could be short for giving this opportunity for the two questions, but before I'm short, all right. Mike, very quickly, we need a mic here. Okay, one, two, just the two of you, the gentleman right here, and my colleague back there.
Joseph, Professor Moti from Nigeria. Just a question, maybe a member of the panel must have done something instead. You know, the extraction of these minerals leads to destruction and the management issues. In cases we have insurgency, terrorism, and a lot of things happening by global powers. Anybody with concrete evidence for us in any African country?
So I hear two issues that may not be quite related unless I didn't get you right. The first issue was on after extraction, then what? Rehabilitation, right? And the other issue on terrorism, how is it linked to those two? Just to extraction, post-extraction conflicts. All right. Anybody who wants maybe to give it a shot? Anybody with an idea on those issues? We have very limited time, many of the panelists.
So in my presentation, had we had more time, I was going to discuss the need for shared and common laws for extraction-based environmental degradation, because a lot of times there are people from outside nations who come and extract minerals from Africa and pollute the environment and create severe environmental degradation that is not necessarily in one point or location. So if the mine is located in Congo, the impacts are still felt in places such as Zambia due to the transnational and transboundary nature of resources like rivers and waters and cloud precipitation. So I believe one key manner that we need to really focus on is developing a shared legislative structure as the African Union, similar to that which is seen in the European Parliament, which has a shared, they share a legal structure to say that this is how we are all collectively responding to these polluters. So we have a shared voice and a shared perspective of if this company, for example, Anglo-American, Anglo-Ashanti, is doing this and causing acid mine drainage, which causes leaching in rivers and death of animals and causes cancer, how exactly do we intend to redress this? How do we all see it to be the most effective way to respond to this solution? So I believe a lot of times our environmental law structures, especially in the African Union, we need to find a way to say, how are we actually collectively addressing this? Because a lot of times the laws and structures are just individual nations, and some nations are more able to address and respond to environmental degradation due to their own GDP development resources, whilst others cannot. So if we have a collective voice that says we all share a perspective of how we believe remediation or redress or rehabilitation should happen, we can actually have a more effective strategy towards responding towards it due to the transnational nature of resources.
I will make a very quick comment on that. There are two avenues through which environmental regeneration after extraction happens. One, there is a voluntary model. There are companies like Lafarge who have global policy. Whenever they extract, they have to rehabilitate the environment. However, there are institutions, government institutions, that issue mining licenses. And these ones have legal power to hold those people who are mining and extracting to restore the environment. Now, why it's not happening, because I know some of these things are embedded in policy, where either you collect part of the money from the process upfront to enable you now rehabilitate should the other partner only be interested in extraction and living, or a clause that holds them accountable to be able to do that. So I think the bigger responsibility lies at the government level. I'm really under pressure. Just the last person there. Doc, one last one. Yes, I need a mic there very quickly, just very quickly.
The other questions you can ask during networking session.
Yes, just the last one. Okay.
Just a quick one, and listening to the panelists and also the earlier speakers, how can Africa actually enhance its minerals and environmental sector using the value chain? What are the value chain framework policy do we need, especially when it comes to industrialization in this digitalized world? Thank you.
Anyone who can answer that in just very quickly?
I think on that one, we need to make sure that like the African mining vision is implemented like everywhere in the continent. And I think number two, we also need to make sure that the African is put at the center when it comes to benefiting from the minerals, or like when it comes to the green industrial policies we are coming up with, like at the moment, to say how are we supposed to make sure that the Africans are going to own and control and manage the means, the product, like the means of production, the factors of production, when it comes to extraction, when it comes to value addition, and when it comes to the entire like food chain of our critical minerals. I think if we are to do that, we will, number one, increase the African agents and also amplify the African voice.
Terminal remarks on the whole session. Corona taught us a very interesting lesson, that we can be economically and geopolitically alienated and isolated, but we cannot be so in terms of matters of global health and in terms of climate change. Therefore, the discourse of climate change cannot be seen from a diabolical perspective of either developing and developed nations, because we live under one sun. And whatever we do to the planet jointly will result in catastrophes either to all of us or catastrophes to none of us, and therefore we must see this discussion, this burden, and this responsibility as a joint yoke under which we walk, and therefore each of us does his best to ensure we are all insulated. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.
All right. Thanks, colleagues. And I think you might have realized the reason I was sitting here is I was looking at the moderator in the eye and saying, good people, I love to have a drink with Dr. Mahasi to apologize profusely. But the reason for this is that we want to have one more session. It's a critical session. And therefore, may I request Dr. Flora Karimi, Program Manager, Consortium for Advanced Research Training in Africa, Qatar, Kenya, to come and introduce. I think the speakers can just come over. This is a session that we are bringing in because we think matters health are very important. And we'll have this session for a few minutes, then we proceed for lunch. And, Dr. Karimi, most welcome, and I'm sure you'll lead us from here. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I was prepared to say good morning, based on the fact that the program was talking about a morning session, but we promised that we will be as fast, as quick as possible. My name is Dr. Flora Karimi. I work for the African Population and Health Research Center, where I head research and related capacity strengthening aspects. And in addition to that, I lead or I manage the Consortium for Advanced Research Training in Africa. And I just want to start off from where Dr. Bukachi stopped when he was mentioning the fact that in Africa, there is a lot that we learned from the COVID period. And there were many solutions that were given in the health sector that may not necessarily have come from Africa and may not necessarily have been applicable to Africa because they were not solutions that came from Africa. And that's what we want to address today. We want to look at the whole aspect of how do we ensure that the voices of Africa speak into Africa and are heard. How do we break or how do we decolonize aspects that touch on research as a whole? Coming from a center that deals with research and that transforms lives in Africa through research, we are really keen on ensuring that the capacities that we have for research are within Africa and for Africa. And I'll talk about the Consortium for Advanced Research Training in Africa, which focuses on building the capacities of African institutions to come up with well-trained leaders, well-trained researchers for the region. And with me here, I have panelists from the Consortium for Advanced Research Training in Africa, graduates who have gone through this program, graduates who are flourishing in terms of their research trajectory. This has been a program that has been running for the last 13 years. And so we want to just have a discussion around where do we see ourselves as Africa in breaking the whole aspect of decolonization in research. How do we place ourselves in a way that we become that African agency that informs research in Africa and for Africa? And so with us, just to mention the panelists we have Dr. Jepchirchir Chiplangat, who is a lecturer at Moore University, and she's also gone through the Kata program, and she's also a public health expert. We also have Dr. Grace Budia, who's a senior lecturer at the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. And we have Dr. Samuel Mwaniki, who's a pharmacist and works at the University of Nairobi. But we've also brought on board Professor Jonathan Cohen, who is the Director of Policy Engagement from the University of Southern California. And so we will have this discussion and look at what are the experiences that we have had? Are there any inequalities when we talk about global health that have affected us even as we have gone through the journey of research and getting grants and projects within the region? So I'll start off with Grace. I think that's where I'll start the questions. And I want to touch on the collaborations that you have had with different individuals. You've been a core researcher, you have been a core author, and you've also had partnerships with different individuals from high-income countries. You could share with us an example of a time when you felt challenged in this particular partnership as you are co-authoring or even as you are coming up with projects together with individuals or a group that was coming from the high-income countries. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, I have had collaborations and I have experienced some challenging power differentials. I think I would speak to the very first time that I had contact with Global North. I was an undergraduate student at Moi University, and there was this CEDA-funded collaboration of student exchange program, and I found myself in Sweden as a fourth-year nursing student, and the only activities that my mentor allowed me to do was to handle the bedside urinal and the bedpan. And when I was coming back from that exchange program, I couldn't help to ask myself, so what did I learn from this exchange program? But then, of course, I appreciated the infrastructure and I enjoyed the visit to Sweden. I speak to that experience because as I practice today, as I engage with collaborators, right now I'm an academician, and just 2 weeks ago we were discussing a student exchange program, and I couldn't help to reflect on my experience as a student. And when we are negotiating that memorandum, I couldn't help to say, we need to be clear when our students go to this European setting, what are they supposed to do? What are the objectives that they're going to achieve? And I find that very relevant. And also, when I have had my experience as a Qatar graduate, which I was privileged to work with different high-income collaborators, and one of the challenges I experienced, even as I was working with my mentor, is when they have to bring in their own context. We want to do research that is context-specific, but they want to mentor me into their, what they consider is the problem. But I think in global health, we need to amplify our voices. We need, as Africans, to be able to articulate what really affects us. One of the things that I would really speak to is the biases that I find in publication and co-authorship. I find that we have a lot of emphasis. Of course, most of the journals, the reputable journals, we find them in Global North. And there is some skepticism that I find with when we have to articulate our research from our setting. Recently, we did a commentary article which we submitted to a very reputable European journal. And this article was absolutely just rejected. And we advised the co-author, could we put your mentor as one of the co-author in this article? And we put the mentor as the second author in this article, which he had not contributed. And actually, the paper was accepted. So I find that there is some, I don't know whether this skepticism is real or is a perspective. But in publications, I find that the research that is coming from Global South is not being really articulated at the best level. I would admit, yes, that the quality of research that we are producing, probably because of the many aspects that have been alluded this morning, probably is not the best quality. There can be improvement. But that which we are producing with our limited resources, with the language barriers, is there a way that it can be articulated at the best level in the best journals? Does it mean the journals that are in the Global South are not good enough for us to be able to articulate these researches? We find in health, we are only talking about those journals that are in PubMed, and we know the challenges. Yes, I acknowledge the issue of open access. It's really increasing the ability for us to access those knowledge products, but there is still a lot of inequality. We are not able to access the knowledge that has been generated in Global South at the level with which we would expect to. This knowledge is generated in global south. I mean, and then once it is published in those high-level journals, the knowledge is behind paywalls. How many of us, we are lucky as Carter graduates, we've been really supported to go through the PhD, and the research was funded, and all the articles that we had to publish were funded. But you find there are many researchers in my context who are doing very good research, but that research does not find itself in journals that can be accessed. Even the citations, they are based in the global north. But I find that even as we imagine this African agency, it is important to think, how can we strengthen the ability of the knowledge to be shared in Africa? How can we strengthen the journals in African context? The fact that they are new, it doesn't mean that they have no quality. The fact that the impact factor for this journal is very low. What can we do to be able to strengthen and ensure that everybody who is generating some knowledge is finding itself in a way that it can be shared and utilized? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's so powerful. You know, thinking of even the journals, recently I had someone mention how this was a question that came up in a group whereby we're talking about employment in universities, for example. You need to have had your publications done in peer-reviewed journals that have high impact. And I think that is what Grace is raising, in the sense that where our local kind of journals that have high impact. Maybe those are some of the aspects that we need to start thinking of and ask ourselves, how do we raise or amplify this voice of researchers from Africa doing research about Africa, and being able to have that voice amplified in journals and in communication that is made? I want to come to you, Jepchirchir, and I'm sure you've also been in similar situations. How has it been for you? And have you been in situations where you have challenged the whole view that knowledge and power has to come from the North in order to inform research in Africa?
Great. Thank you so much, Flora. And picking up from where Grace just left, I've had the privilege to work in a partnership. If some of us have heard about the AMPAC partnership, academic model providing access to healthcare, it is a collaboration between Moi University, Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, and a consortium of institutions in North America and Europe. In this consortium, I've worked as a research administrator for 15 years. And while working there, as I did my PhD with the Qatar and the support, one of the things that worked with and in support with the administration in the institution was challenging that power dynamics. And to enable us navigate through that process, one of the key things were to develop policies that actually guided our partnership. For a very long time, since we started in 2001, we had our researchers or investigators from Global North develop proposals, and because, in Kenyan environment and also within the local environment at Moi, you can't come as an international researcher to do research in Kenya without a collaborator in Moi or without a collaborator in Kenya. And one of the things that would happen was that a researcher in Global North would develop a proposal and sort of look for who is there who is doing a similar research in that environment. And that happened in various circumstances where you find an investigator's name in a proposal, but they honestly have no say in that proposal. And as that time, I mean, as we observed that, one of the key things that we did, and as part of, empowering our investigators in our environment, was to develop policies that if you are coming from the global north and want to collaborate, we want to mutually, partner and respect each other. And part of that respect is that we collaborate in the development of the proposal itself. And as part of the collaboration, we jointly now have biannual meetings to set priorities for our local environment. What is our priorities in terms of our research? So that when we are developing proposals, we are focusing on those local priorities. And within that as well is, how are we empowering our researchers within our environment to be able to co-lead, not co-led, but co-lead the proposal development as well? I must say we've grown over time, and we now see a number of our researchers within our environment now, winning R01s, proposals funded by NIH, without actually having a an MPI, what they call multiple principal investigator in that environment. That it is led by a Kenyan, and they are looking for collaborators from the global north, not to be able to access funding, but be able to also allow certain expertise to be used within our environment. So I think one of the key things that I have seen as one of the areas to challenge these power dynamics is having, a partnership that is mutually beneficial, and you can actually, structure in policies and procedures that do guide such partnership. And once you have that, it's helped in, growing our partnership, ensuring that we actually grow together and not one component or one part of the partnership growing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've raised quite important points on the issue of, oh yes, let's give her a clap. Okay. You've raised quite important points about being clear on policies and also being co-leads, not just the ones who are part of the being co-led, but being co-leads in this particular endeavor. But you've also raised the aspect of mutual partnerships, equitable kind of partnerships. And we are seeing a lot of push, especially in the health research areas, whereby we are having more and more Africans coming up and saying, we need to stand our ground. We need to challenge this particular perspective that has been there for long, that knowledge and power always has to come from the north. And as we start thinking of how we can push this agenda more, I want to hear from Samuel, and more so in the area of, what do you think about the moves and the current perspective that we have been having in terms of, let's have more of Africans coming up and pushing the agenda towards an equitable kind of partnership? What is positive about that stand? And what can be done differently so as to accelerate the rate at which we get to that place where African voices are heard more?
Okay, thank you, Flora. I think I will anchor my response on what Qatar does and what it has done for us as fellows and eventually as graduates. When you get into Qatar, you get there with an idea of what you want to do for your PhD. So it's not like someone already has a big project running, and then they come and pick you and they tell you, find a place to pick back on this project, and then we'll see if you can publish 1 or 2 papers, and then you'll be able to graduate. When you come into Qatar, you come with your idea, and the idea is to have you build on that, because actually once you arrive, it is dismantled, and then you start writing your ideas in 10 words, and then you grow that until it becomes a proposal. So you are taught how to read and how to write scientifically, and interestingly, you're also taught how to think critically. And then from there, then you understand the kind of research question that you want to answer, the kind of methods that you're going to use to answer this research question. And then from there, once you have collected, analyze the data, there, how are you going to disseminate this information in the classical pathways that we know for knowledge dissemination, be it presentation at conferences or publication of scripts in peer-reviewed journals. So it's a whole process that supports fellows until they become graduates, and it does not end there. After you graduate, you are given more capacity to be able to write grants and to compete for grants and win grants. I know from privileged information that the graduates seated here over 2 or 3 years have been able to raise close to 500 million Kenya shillings in terms of funds for research. Yeah? And compare that with what we have in the National Research Fund of our country, which has a budget of 300 million shillings, and most, of course, goes to administration. This is a model that has really worked and should be emulated by other partnerships so that we eventually have a critical mass of African-based researchers who are leading research which is done in Africa, not being co-led, as Chiri has just mentioned. And in this way, not just in the area of health, we can move this to climate change, the conversations that we have been having, to infrastructure that we have been talking about, so that indeed what we come up with as the knowledge products are what we need for our environment. I want to bring in a very important aspect. For example, for you to win a grant, you need either mostly to be a first author or a senior author. So initially, you would see programs where you have got PhD fellows as first authors from the global north, and then their supervisors are the senior authors in the paper. And then as people who did the implementation here, Chirichir, Mbudi, and myself are fighting for space inside there. Probably Flora, as our program lead, will also be fighting for some space there. But what Kata has done is to enable us actually become first authors in all your publications, and then most likely, because your supervisor is also based on the continent, then they are going to be the senior author. Then from there, you can be able to go on and compete for grants and be able to conduct research. What needs to be done differently? I think we need to allocate more resources. We need to bring in the issue of African philanthropy. If you look at this building, when we came in, I think it's called Samoa Building. So that means there is someone from the global north who probably donated funds and they helped in the construction of this building. This auditorium is called the Microsoft Auditorium. I'm sure it's not just the name. That means there were some resources that were committed. Going forward, we need to go to the institutions and see, this is Krusi Krubi Hall, this is James Mwangi Hall, and then this is a Safaricom Auditorium here, and that kind of thing, so that our resources are not just for primitive accumulation. We distribute them to be able to create knowledge that we need to develop as a continent.
Thank you, thank you. And that means we all have to arise and realize that we have the power within us to change situations around. There's been the whole argument around how much can we do as Africans to bring funds to Africa, and which has also been a great challenge. Grace, I don't know whether you want to add something more to this whole agenda of what are we doing positively and what should we do differently?
Thank you. Yes, I think on what we are doing positively, I think we are, even this conversation, this discourse we are having today, I think it's something good. One of the things that I find is the issue that most continental agency like the APHRC, which comes through this program of Qatar, they have done a lot of capacity strengthening in research, the issues of CDC Africa. So having continental agencies getting into the conversation of improving research in Africa, it's something I find very interesting and something that I think should be embraced. We need to really mentor the young researchers. You find that in our universities, we do not have any focus of developing these early career professionals, researchers. We do not have funding for any master's or PhD programs as we will find in the North. So I believe that there is room for improvement. We need to build capacity. We need to strengthen the kind of graduates that we are channeling from our academic institution. And this can only be possible through what Samuel is saying. Can we have funding? So for 3 of us, we benefited from the Consortium of Advanced Training in Africa to have quality training. But what more can be done to those graduate students who are struggling with their research? I mentor PhD students and I can't help to pity them. What can you do at PhD level in terms of research that you are funding personally and you need to publish this research in peer-reviewed journal? Really, and that boils to the kind of graduates we are channeling from our institution, and that will make us not be able to transform the health agenda in Kenya, not because we do not have the ability, but because we haven't built capacity. So I believe what we can do better is continue to build capacity. More agencies should come to be able to strengthen the kind of training that we are having for our graduates. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, I know we've talked a lot about what we are doing in Africa, and you coming from a high-resourced site, especially in collaborations, what do you think should be done? Are we okay with where we are at right now? Maybe from where you sit, we are okay in having these power dynamics, but what is your perspective? What should change? Does anything need to change, or should we just go on as things are, and what exactly should we do differently? Thank you.
Thank you, Flora. And thank you to the organizers for making time for this important conversation. So I'm not part of Carta, as you said. I represent a research university in a high-income country where I'm a professor of global health and human rights. So my role is really to comment on how it feels for us to have our power, frankly, our unearned power, challenged so profoundly in multi-country health research. And the context for this, of course, is very significantly the COVID-19 pandemic and the profound inequalities, global inequalities that the pandemic revealed, and the real reckoning that the pandemic contributed to at institutions like ours, a reckoning about our complicity in those inequalities and in those inequitable power dynamics. At our own institution at the University of Southern California, we took that opportunity to interrogate the way that we engage in multi-country research partnerships, and out of that adopted a series of 8 principles that we commit to in all research partnerships that we engage in with institutions anywhere in the world. And I want to credit my colleagues who are not here, Professor Laura Ferguson, Professor Sophia Gruskin, who spearheaded this process of developing these principles on behalf of our institution. And the principles will sound very consistent with what you've heard from the Carta graduates. So we commit in our research partnership to sustainability, to mutual benefit and reciprocity, to equitable governance, to not doing harm, to advancing locally identified priorities, to complying with ethical and legal standards, to information sharing, and to accountability. Now, how does it feel to comply with those principles? To be honest, it actually feels immensely freeing. I no longer, I feel freed. I feel in a way liberated from the concern that my inputs will disproportionately skew a conversation simply by virtue of where I'm from, the color of my skin, the resources at my command. I actually feel liberated by a kind of surrender to not knowing where a partnership is going to go, to surrendering to feelings of genuine curiosity about where a conversation is heading, rather than feeling trapped by a kind of predetermined outcome that I'm trying to force a conversation into. I feel liberated by the opportunity to truly get to know other people's work, their priorities, how they approach their work, their thinking style, their working style, how they approach collaboration, how they approach facilitation, how they approach responsibilities that in the past were arbitrarily assigned to me and my institution by virtue of where I came from. As much as it feels freeing to reroute and to challenge power dynamics, it also feels immensely humbling. And the reason it feels humbling is that ultimately we remain part of a system that no one of us has the ability to change or control. So just to give one example, most of the time in these multi-country research partnerships, our funding source remains a government or a foundation from a high-income country. The single largest funder of biomedical research in the world today, including in low remains the US National Institutes of Health. And we still, as much as Jepchirchir said, they have made important reforms. All of us who engage in these partnerships and seek their funding, nevertheless are under pressure to operate under their incentives, to present our work in ways that they, and by extension, their reviewers, their anonymous reviewers, will find compelling, to meet their deadlines, to conform to their templates, to demonstrate local buy-in for them, which we know is often not the same as local control. So to answer your question, how does it feel? It feels freeing and it feels humbling. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And through what you've said, it appears that there is a deliberate effort globally for us to move, or the globe to move towards decentered kind of powers, and also reroute the traditional power dynamics. And Samuel, I'm just wondering, I know you have heard a lot about this whole discussion around derouting our traditional power dynamics. And I'm sure you have either thought positively or negatively about the whole aspect of derouting. What has surprised you most? It may be positive, it may be something pleasant or something unpleasant that has surprised you about this shift towards a different kind of power dynamics.
Okay, thank you, Flora. I think I'll start by saying that it's not in the nature of power to shift power. A demand has to be made for power to yield anything. And over time, there are things that have happened that are very positive. If I can start with the example that Chiri gave, they can now work even as single PIs and win R grants again from the National Institute of Health. And there has been a shift from just requiring people to be participants in the process. You can actually lead the research, which means that then you are able to lead research that is inspired by the needs that you see in your community. Yeah, and this shift has happened not just with the NIH, even with the other funders, of course, from the Global North, such as Wellcome Trust. Initially, if you wanted to apply for a grant as an early career researcher, it was a requirement for you to have a mentor from the UK, yeah? But it's not the case. Now you can have a mentor from the UK if you need one from the UK, but you can actually have a mentor from an LMIC country who is an expert in your topic, and you can work with them. So for me, that has been a pleasant surprise, and I think we need to have more of that going forward. What has unpleasantly surprised me has to do with our systems back home. Because, well, you go and get the resources and bring them because the funders from the Global North have eased the requirement. But once the funds get into your institution, it's almost impossible for you to get the funds to do the research. I don't know whether anyone else resonates with this or is a unique thing that happens in the institution where I come from, yeah? And you know these funds are time-bound. You're supposed to spend the funds within a year, account for the funds, then you can get the next bunch of the funds for you to continue doing the work. So I think we need to change our bureaucratic rigidity as far as the administration of research funds is concerned in our setting. And then lastly, the other thing that I said, we also need to have funding of funded by African and funded by African governments. Came in, someone was speaking about us talking about decolonization, but using the colonizers' resources to decolonize. It's a parody, so we need to invest more as governments and as philanthropists. Thank you.
Thank you. And as we bring this to more of a close, there's something that Jepchirchir referred to when she was talking about how they are challenging the power dynamics. And she mentioned about how a lot of the agendas are really coming from other areas. And they are being brought into our context. And we are being told as Africans to fit into these research agendas. Grace, from where you sit, and from your understanding of the research agendas that are being set, who is setting these agendas? Can we do things differently? How do we challenge that specific space so that then we are having our communities and the needs of the communities met better, even as we think of challenging the power dynamics? And what would you prioritize in terms of community agendas, research agendas for Africa?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Flora. I think who is setting the research agendas? I think the funding agency, the research agenda is actually being set at the market of the global initiatives because they own the money. So more often we will find ourselves, we have to align our research interest with where the money is, because the call will come and that will dictate what kind of research I'm going to do, because in the first place, I don't have money to fund the interest that I have. Yes, in many forums, we are going to see it even in the academic institutions to see what are our departmental agendas, what is the university research agenda, but we will always have to align that to where is the money. So at the end of the day, I would say that much of the research that we are doing, it is determined by the funding agencies, unfortunately, or indirectly. And I think, in my view, if it was possible that we are generating this agenda from bottom up, can we have community assessments and be able to inform, this is the problem in my community. Lifestyle intervention for non-communicable diseases is what I feel I need to intervene in my community. And I look for funds to be able to address that. other than going and checking where is the national research agenda going, where am I likely to get money? It is in climate change. I'm not saying climate change is not a problem. So can we be informed by community assessments? Can we be able to come from bottom and be able now to have funds to address what is ailing us, other than dropping from up down? Where is the money? Then what can I do with, to be able to get this money to be in terms of research grants? Thank you.
Any last words on the same?
Sure. In June this year, it was quite humbling to be invited by the National Institute of Health in the US, specifically the Fogarty International Center, to sit in a forum where their advisory board had an open session to listen to, partners and people who've received funding from Fogarty. And in this forum, I was able to sit in and share, the experiences that we've had in our collaboration, in our partnership, and how we've been able to sit as a community of both Global North and Global South to set research agenda for the Global South and focus on that research agenda in the application of our, in applying for funding to do research that focus on priorities that are relevant to us within our community. I must say this is something that the NIH, Fogarty International Center, is taking it seriously at this point, where they are coming together to look at what are the priorities. And one of the key areas that they've done this especially is in the calls for their early career investigators, not just NIH in the US, but even, as Monique did mention, even in the UK. If you look at early career call for proposals, they no longer focus on specific area of research, but often they mention that an area of research that is of priority to your country. And what else could we be able to do if we can't, front our areas of priorities and apply for funding using that opportunity? I think that has really changed or shifted in the recent past. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we have heard a lot in terms of the shift that is taking place and what we need to do. So I believe this panel deserves a clap from us. Okay. You've been challenged in quite a number of ways. I know some of us have started thinking of, what do I do differently from where I sit? Maybe I'll just allow, through the chair, for 2 responses, and then we will call it a day. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Peter Mbuva. Just on the very last point that you raised, just recently I read about a researcher from Zambia who went to study on scholarship at Cambridge University. And he studied chemistry to become a serious researcher on vaccines. And one of the serious issues he raises is about this issue of agency, especially on African states, and it points to weaknesses in the legal structures on the institutions. Because he says Africa is the best because of genetic diversity to test and make trials of new drugs and vaccines. And you saw we were found by COVID unprepared. But then again, messaging that, why is Africa considered? Can you see some dangers that are found that we could actually risk the health of our people? So the issue of brain drain, when our researchers get scholarship and stay there, they cannot find a place to work here, remains a serious problem as to why we cannot increase our voice. Because if they remain here, they will identify with the needs and the interests of our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I'm seeing 1, 2, Chair. I'm seeing, okay. 3, 1, 2, 3, and then we close. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Mine is kind of a comment, but we can react to it. To say, like, all of us, we experience a situation whereby our journals are rejected, like in those high-impact international journals. But then, like, when we were at a conference in Beijing, being trained to say, how can we make our global South voices being heard the way the global North voices are heard anywhere else in the world? The question was like, who is supposed to make the African voices being heard? And what should be done by the African to constitute what they say knowledge is knowledge? Are we supposed to say we are supposed to be accepted by someone else, or we are supposed to do it on our own? Because in a way, it would look like we are all competing to say, let us publish those big international journals in the global world. Why are we not saying we establish our journals here, saying like in Kenya and South Africa and Zimbabwe, then we start publishing in those ones, and then we become the what? The client of our own knowledge before it is known somewhere else. I don't know what you think about that one.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Gilda Odera. I just want to commend the panel for such an excellent discussion. He stole the thunder from me, but I just want to add to what he has spoken about. I believe charity begins at home. And we have such a large population in Africa, growing. We have a large population coming up, educated. Now, if the information we need is within us, and it is for us, why not focus on what we need? And I just wanted to ask a question. I really like what Carter's doing, but I wanted to ask a question. Normally, academia does their thing, and then you have government. I don't know to what extent and how often the private sector is involved. This sort of presentation today, if you ask me, this room should have been full of private sector people. And the reason why I say that is that they're the ones who would fund. So I think there's a disconnect to a large extent in terms of what academia needs for the research and what private sector can do to see that what we've spoken about today and heard from the panel can start being actualized and can grow. So that's the comment that I have. Thank you.
Question or reaction? Person behind, and then we'll come here.
Okay, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I think nowadays it's very common, even within global health and I think other discussions, the word decolonize, to come in, But many times I feel I think we do not know what we may mean by we want to decolonize. Like, for instance, I think the word has come up quite a bit within the presentations, and yet, as has been alluded to, the funding to decolonize is still coming from the colonizers, yeah? Number two, we are still being invited to go to the NHI and present what we want to talk about. We are still seeking the reputable journals in the North to publish there, and we're actually bowing to the pressure to include a mentor who did not contribute into the paper, So I think my thinking of decolonization, it's a very radical, process, yeah? And then I come to the thinking of Samir Amin when he talks about delinking and decoupling, not about collaboration and seeking to be included and seeking to be invited. I think if you're truly going to decolonize, it is about delinking as was imagined and envisaged, a radical transformation as was envisaged by Samir Amin, it cannot be about tweaking at the edges just to, and we're saying we are decolonizing. We cannot just be doing the small things and saying we are decolonizing. Thank you.
Last.
Thank you. I will start where she ended with the Samir Amin approach. I think it should be a geopolitical approach of health. What we Africans are selling abroad, what do we have? When the COVID-19 pandemic started, Africa was presented as the continent that would be the most affected. But Africa appeared to be the continent that was least affected, with about 1.5 affected people, or 0.5 deaths of COVID-19. But I don't know if we Africans, researchers, policymakers, have focused on this issue. What made Africa to be least affected? What did Africans did in terms of health or medicine? There's a panelist that was talking this morning about the discourse. The rhetoric. We should change the rhetoric. We should change the rhetoric. Actually, the African medicine is being called traditional. European is modern. Chinese is Chinese, etc., etc. We should change it. African medicine. In Cameroon, because I'm from Cameroon, Central Africa, there is a private individual who developed a bomb. It's called Bomb Francois. When you use it, it helps you in doing many things. But the government brought out a communique to remove that bomb from the market. Why? Because the lobbying from the pharmacy saw that this was a great challenge to their businesses. So what our policymakers are also doing about the promotion of what we have, of our medicine. So I think we should change this approach, be it from the researchers, because they want to publish in external journals. There are policymakers, what are they doing, and etc. So I think we should change all this way of our style of doing our things. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure we have gone more and more into this discussion, but in the interest of time, I need to bring this to a close. But I seem to be hearing quite a lot in terms of we are our own enemies. I'm just trying to gather all that we have said. We are our own enemies. We do not sell what we have in Africa. We are working in silos. We are leaving the whole ecosystem and only focusing on the public and academic end, and forgetting that we have the industry that should also come into this picture. We also are eager to think of the journals outside at the expense of our own journals. And so I think from what we have all said, we seem to be saying we need to look for better ways of being intentional about being that common voice, which is not disintegrated, which is not anyway, so that then we are able to push towards Africa being the Africa that also has the power to determine what should be in Africa. So having said that, I can see the chair is really looking at me. So thank you very much, and thank you for giving us this opportunity. Thank you.
One is called Sha, another one is called Sheep. Which are, but I think those can be unpacked, I guess, as the moderator said. Advisor the way to proceed, and unfortunately, I will advise that we use about 40 to 45 minutes of lunch so that we are back here at 3 into reform of global governance, as well as the Africa Americas Forum on China kind of discussions, very interesting geopolitical discussions.
Thank you very much. I take this opportunity to again welcome you to Strathmore. A few directions. From here, we'll get back to the ground floor. We are on the ground floor. So we'll get to the ground floor, and then we will turn, when we get out of the building, we will turn to the left and walk to the Strathmore Business School. And when we get to the Strathmore Business School, we will get to the second floor. The restaurant is Masai Mara, where we are going to have our lunch. And we would request that we come back quickly, because there's a walking distance. And as Dr. has said, we have a packed afternoon. So welcome to lunch. We'll see you in a bit. Thank you very much.